Okay. You seeing it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for our third and final presentation from Backyard Farms for our workshops. This one is about food systems and marketing. So we're going to jump right in. This one's a pretty packed one. It could actually be several workshops, but we're trying to squeeze it all into one. So we'll jump right into this. So, what are food systems? Food systems are a complex of activities that involve feeding a population, including the production, processing, transport, and consumption of food. So, this involves both the farming and ranching part of it, the processing, which is that value added we've been talking about, which is either the butchering of animals, the manufacturing, cooking, baking, all that kind of stuff, and then the transporting of those things to the consumers or the markets and then the actual consumption of the food by the consumers. Are you handling the admitting? Or is, I guess that's stuck with me now. Okay, gotcha. Here we go. Food systems can be viewed on a variety of different levels. So we've got our global level of a food system on a global scale. We've got a national food system here within the United States. And then we can also look at the local level here in New Mexico, a food system within the state. But then you can also see a food system within your local county or local region. Sometimes we look at it within those levels as well. So within the national food system, we've got some issues that have been identified. So this comes from a paper that came out of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and this is way back in 2008, but these things still very much apply. Nothing's changed, unfortunately, in almost 20 years. These issues are still very much the same. So if you want to go and visit that link and read that paper, all of these things really do apply. And it boils down to food production, the distribution, and food justice. Food production issues are about involve the confined feeding operations. So some people call this the animal concentration farms and the practices they use, which involve a lot of hygiene issues and things like that, animal rights problems, antibiotics and animal feeds to mask a lot of those sorts of hygiene issues, the monoculture industry farms and the synthetic chemicals. So don't just think it's just about animal operations. Monoculture applies both to plant operations as well, and the synthetic chemicals are used on plants for herbicides, pesticides, things like that as well. And an example of this is that a lot of people are finding that their dogs are now developing allergies to chicken. And it's not actually the chickens themselves that these dogs are developing these allergies to. It's really that the chickens are being fed antibiotics, and these poultry antibiotics are what the dogs are actually reacting to. And that's almost your canary in the coal mine because dogs are being fed the poultry they use in pet products are kind of the leftovers they can't use in human food. So those are the exact same chickens and sorts of things that are winding up that are rejects from human food that wind up in pet food, and those dogs are reacting to it. And that's what's in your food, and you may not notice. And these could be contributing to a lot of human health problems as well. And the dogs are just showing us that there are these issues that are going on with that. So some laws are being enacted to try to restrict the use of antibiotics in food. Some of the laws are good to restrict the general feeding, but others may be restricting the use of antibiotics in general for animals. And some of that is actually affecting small farmers that you can't use therapeutic antibiotics for animals. And that's really affected small farmers to try to help your flock and your herds be healthy and things like that and treat them without having to spend expensive sorts of things. So if you read a lot of this, you'll see some of that. And if you're a small farmer yourself, you're finding it harder and harder to be able to buy antibiotics and things like that to treat your animals therapeutically in the way they're supposed to be treated because these big operations are abusing the use of antibiotics in ways they're not supposed to be used. But that's just one example of the abuse of the system that affects everything all the way down to small farmers and the foods that we're eating and the unintended consequences of that that can affect human health, animal health, your pets, everybody who relies on a food system. Food distribution is another. Food deserts, we'll talk a little bit more about that in some more detail and what that is and how that affects it. But the short time for perishability of food, we've touched on that in some other talks before about the perishability of produce and getting that from the farm to the consumer without it rotting and things like that, especially here in New Mexico with our high heats and things like that in the summer. Getting it when it's 100 degrees to places that need it the most, especially in these food deserts, can be a big problem. And that leads to health disparities, especially in low income and minority populations. The foods they need the most, these fruits and vegetables, tend to be the ones with the shortest perishability time frames, are not getting to the people who need it the most. And this can lead to health disparities like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and things like that because of this unequal distribution of food. This leads right into food justice. Food justice, because of unequal distribution of food, also the government is subsidizing unhealthy foods. We'll get into that a little bit more in some more detail, and the corporate concentration of farms and farm subsidies and where your money goes. Your tax-paying dollars are paying for some of the wrong things. Again, I strongly suggest that you take a look and read this and see what some of the biggest problems are in a lot more detail. National food production issues, getting to some of these more, the biggest ones are going to be these monoscale monoculture farms that are planting one crop and one crop only. A lot of people who practice regenerative agriculture plant multiple types of crops and things like that, and there's multiple benefits of that, whereas one disease doesn't come through and wipe out your entire crop, so there's not as much of a need to spray types of pesticides. You can invite all types of beneficial insects and other predators that can help regulate things and manage it in a much more natural form. So then you don't have to use heavy chemical fertilizers and pesticides. You can use more natural sorts of things when you integrate animals and plants into your farm operation. It mimics nature and you can regulate things in a much more natural form. Confined feeding operations, CFOs. Down here in southern New Mexico in what's known as the Colonias region, you know you're reaching one of these farms. You smell it before you even reach it. And that has to do with all the ammonias that are being pumped in. That has to do with all the waste, the fertilizers these animals are standing in for long periods of time. It's ruining their lungs, the people around them. There's impacts on the minority communities that have to live in these areas around these sorts of operations, the abuse to the animals. There's so many awful things that have to do with these sorts, and they mask a lot of these, as we mentioned, with antibiotics and things like that to keep the animals from getting sick and dying. The average lifespan of a dairy cow in one of these confined feeding operations is about 2 to 3 years. The actual lifespan of a cow, of a dairy cow, can be up to 20 years. So think about the difference in that. And they can be milked and everything for up to that 20 years. Regenerative agriculture farmers will keep them that whole time up there, and they will be very productive that whole time, up to 20 years even. Um, Big difference. Um, Only 2% of US cropland is used to grow fruits and vegetables. This is shocking. We eat way more than 2% worth of crops of fruits and vegetables. I had a whole stir fry with some meat last night for dinner, and that should make up, fruits and vegetables should make up a huge part of your diet. Now, I know Robert Kennedy just changed some of our food pyramid and what we're eating, but still, fruits and vegetables should still make up a huge part of the average human diet. And 2% of cropland we should be growing way more of the United States cropland should be growing fruits and vegetables. So there's a huge mismatch in what we're producing and what we're eating. Most of our croplands are growing things like soybeans and corn that can't be eaten by humans are either grown for ethanol and other things like that. And the government is subsidizing this. They're using your tax-paying dollars and mine to subsidize farmers that are growing unhealthy foods, sugar, and a whole bunch of other things that we shouldn't be eating that much of, and not giving it to fruit and vegetable farmers. Only 1% of all US subsidies go to fruit and vegetable farmers. And I think the majority of people on this call are fruit and vegetable farmers. And of us, only 1% of our tax-paying dollars subsidies are going to farmers like you and I. and only 2% of our cropland is being used to grow this. So that is a huge mismatch. If you want to read more about that, the United States Department of Agriculture has a huge report about this, the Rural America at a Glance, and talks about all of these statistics. And even though this is from 2018, it's still very relevant and none of this has changed. So talking about food desert. Food desert in a nutshell, if you don't have a car and there's no supermarket within a mile, you're in a food desert. I tell people even if you have a car and you have to travel more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get a head of lettuce, you're in a food desert. So this is where the access to affordable, nutritious food is fairly limited. So this distribution of food, that limited amount of food that's being grown and distributed doesn't reach everybody equally. You can see here in New Mexico, this is the grade from the worst to the most accessible. Most of New Mexico, as you can see, is well within a food desert. So we're not just in a geographic desert, but we're in a food desert. And this leads to food systems and food justice. So extreme and persistent health disparities, when you don't have access to this type of healthy foods, it leads to a lot of health problems. And especially low-income populations and communities of color are directly related to this access to healthy foods. We find that 60% of New Mexicans are overweight or obese and 12.5% have diabetes. Heart disease is the leading cause of death here in New Mexico. All of these are diet-related diseases that are strongly influenced by diet and can be controlled and managed very strongly by our diets. And if we're eating unhealthy foods, these get worse. New Mexico is also leads the nation in childhood hunger. About 42% of working families earn less than 200% of the poverty line. So we're among the top of the worst lists of things, and childhood hunger being that. Hunger is not just an issue of charity, it's an issue of justice. This is one of the directors of the United Nations Food and Agriculture has said, and it's very true. We have to stop thinking of food as charity. New Mexico's food system, ag is big business in New Mexico. It makes up, and I think it's even greater now. They're probably going to come out with the newest statistics after they evaluate everything from 2025. But at least $3 billion of the state's economy comes from agriculture. We are a big ag. Ag makes up a huge part of our state's economy. So it's not just oil and gas. And 79% of our state's farms are small farms. Now, this is really unusual. Most of them are under 20 acres. And 40% of these are actually under 10 acres. They're between 1 and 9 acres. So when we talk small farms, we mean small farms because it's tough to farm in New Mexico. Farming 1 acre in New Mexico is like 100 acres in almost any other state. It is tough. Our water, our land, our weather, everything is 10 times tougher. You know, they say everything's bigger in Texas. Well, everything's tougher in New Mexico. So to put this in perspective, our next door neighbor in Texas, 100 acres is the size of the average farm, not 20, not 10. And in Arizona, the average farm is 454 acres. Put that in perspective. So we are very much a small farm, family farm state. It sets us apart from every other state in the nation. Small farms are what we have, and hard times. 65% of small farms report a net loss despite those federal subsidies. That 1% of subsidies that go to fruit and vegetable farmers, we still get a net loss. Many of our farmers operate with less than 10% margins. A lot of other businesses set aside a much larger margin so that when they fall on hard times, they have something to fall back on. We have less than 10%, which puts our farmers at a very high risk of financial problems. Corporate concentration is another very big problem for small farmers. That 454 acres in Arizona, it's no coincidence that the majority of farms are owned by corporations in Arizona. And most of those are not even owned by American corporations in Arizona. If you take a look at them, they're Chinese and Saudi organizations that own most of the farms in Arizona. Which is raises big problems that they're exporting their water to China and the Middle East. They're farming all this land and sending it far, far away, and none of it's being used to feed, Arizonans or even Americans in any way. But here in New Mexico, we do. The USDA found that corporate concentration and the subsequent decline in competitive agriculture, as these big farms keep swallowing up smaller and smaller farms, there's less and less competition. The inputs and commodities markets are also, the fertilizer companies and seed companies are also being owned by the same companies that are now owning the farms. So small farmers are they're buying their seed and fertilizer for the same company that now they're working for to sell their farm crops to. They're sharecroppers. And this is reverting back to sharecropping, which was never good in American history when this sort of thing happens. So small and mid-sized farmers are becoming very vulnerable to exploitation and saddling small farmers with burdensome debt levels. If you ever remember those songs about owning your soul to the company store, this is the situation that sets up. And that's what we're falling into, according to this USDA study in 2018. And almost 10 years later, it's getting worse and worse nationwide. The southern United States has been hit really hard in the most recent study that's come out. Again, almost all of Arizona is corporate farms. Texas is being taken over by corporate farms. The one thing that seems to be saving little New Mexico is our crazy archaic water rights. Keeps a lot of our farms still in the small farm hands. But that could change, and it is changing very quickly. As a result, these big corporations that own the seeds, own the fertilizer, own the machinery that you have to rent to, pick your pecans and do all these other things, they can increase the price that you have that they charge for everything and for the commodity buyers, and make profitability almost difficult to impossible for small farmers, that you will end up owing your soul to the company store, to these big corporations in the end, and it'll become almost impossible for you to make profits. The more and more you work, the more and more in debt you'll become till you owe them everything. And an example is greedflation. A lot of companies, when COVID hit, started raising prices and saying it was the excuse to jack up their prices. They had to grow their profit margins. But when COVID ended and supply chains released and all these things, none of the prices have come down. Another thing I tell people is when you look at Tractor Supply, you see all these different companies and all these different, for example, chicken feed. You look at all the different types of chicken feed that are out there. But if you take a look and look them up on your phone, who owns all these different brands, you find out there's only like 2 or 3 companies that own all those brands that are on all those shelves. It's really a monopoly. And they set the prices. And none of those prices have ever come down. I've never seen a decrease in any of those prices. The store might have a sale for a day or two, but none of those prices have come down, even though all of those supply chains have now been released and all of those things have come down. So they keep going. And those companies, when you take a look at their stock portfolios and the money that they're making record-breaking amounts of money. And if you happen to be a chicken farmer and you're growing chickens for them, you've got to buy that feed. You've got to buy the chickens from them, the eggs, and all these sorts of things. You're never going to come out ahead. And there was a really interesting study about that, especially in the South, where they do grow a lot of the chickens and things like that. And then when the chicken flu hit, they were just studying all of that. And these chicken farmers are just falling deeper and deeper and deeper into debt and just can't get out. So a lot of them are leaving the chicken industry in debt and getting into vegetable farming and starting regenerative agriculture. Here in New Mexico, many attempts have been made to try to transform what we're doing here and NAFTA and a bunch of other programs have tried to start. Dreaming New Mexico is another program that tried to make things better for New Mexico and our food system and so forth. But nothing's really made a huge impact, unfortunately. You can click on this and read more about this attempt to try to resolve some of the issues and problems. They've tried to work with different importation from Mexico and so forth. And then you can read about the challenges that we've faced here in the state trying to reform and fix our food systems here in New Mexico specifically.
Rachel, I have a quick question. Do other
Yeah.
countries kind of have the same problems that the US has, or is the US kind of unique in that sense?
In which sense?
In sense of like the monopolization, for example, the practices in farming, heavy
Well,
antibiotic, yeah.
the problems are there, but different countries do have different. So the EU does step in and try to break down a lot of the corporate concentrations and things like that. The US has not stepped in. In theory, we do have laws against that, but we haven't enforced them. Um, so yeah, and there's been laws against use in the EU does enforce a lot more laws against using antibiotics and a lot of those practices of fertilizers and things like that that are restricted, and what they can use in Canada does too. The United States has been very slow. There's this idea that consumers will control, the free market will sort things out.
Yeah.
Um, and so it goes back and forth between that. Um, but I mean, if you look at history, you look at the robber barons and things like that with the railroads and all of those sorts of things. And there's a certain point where the government does need to step in and regulate, where companies become so big that they can crush all of their competitors and things like that, and small businesses just don't have a chance.
Yep.
Um,
Okay.
have we reached that with ag? I would say yes. I would say most definitely. Have we reached that with the tech industry and things like that? I would say yeah. But is the
Yeah.
government going to step
I
in?
exactly.
We don't
The government
know.
is kind of focused on the tech right now. I don't know what they're gonna do, but there are.
Big ag is powerful. They're very wealthy and very powerful and have a lot of lobbyists.
Yep.
So the small guys don't have, like I keep saying, poor people don't have enough lobbyists. And that's some of the problem.
Yep.
But within the state, we can, it isn't the nation, and we can regulate what goes on within the state. And I think we can have our voices heard, especially right now is election season. We have a new governor. We're going to have a new governor. Our governor is timed out, so we will have a new election. And I think if ever your voice is going to be heard and your opinions, right now is the time. And we can make changes and laws within our state. And our state, moving into our next slide, is really unique. We have some really unique conditions that other states don't have. New Mexico is the fifth largest state in the union geographically. It's hard to believe, but yeah, next to Texas and Alaska and California, we're right up there. We're number five in the fifth largest state geographically. And we are number one in rural state, meaning we have the largest population of our citizenry living in rural areas. So even though Alaska is bigger, we have more people living in rural areas. And among that, we are the third highest poverty rate. We bounce back and forth all the time with Mississippi. And as of last year, 2025, we're the third highest poverty. So that's a challenge that we do face. We have about a 15 to 20% poverty rate in our state, which is really high net compared to the national level. So we're not as rich as California and other states on the East Coast and so forth. So this presents some really unique challenges that our food system has to overcome. Fortunately, I would say we have some of the best farmers Our farmers are better than California farmers or Floridian farmers. They can farm better than any of them. Any challenges that are out there, we can overcome. There's little doubt that our population demographics play into some of our unique food system features as well. That we are one of six majority minority states. New Mexico has the largest Hispanic Latino population in the nation. We're number one. And New Mexico is number two, the second highest Native American population next to Alaska. So all of this plays into our unique demographics and our food preferences. One of the interesting things that came out of New Mexico Voices for Children has an annual report, and you should definitely click on that and read some of the updated reports. I think the newest one may be coming out later this month, but it helps to report and explain some of the unique economic disparities that we see in our state. And it raises some really important questions. And so this is an independent study. But the study was showing a really interesting trend. They was showing that Hispanics and Native Americans have a lower mean income and higher rates of poverty than many whites and Asians in New Mexico, and yet they receive significantly less cash assistance than these populations. Why is that? Why do we give less to those who need it more? So this definitely shows some economic disparities and food justice that affects both the farmers and customers in New Mexico. So we need to keep an eye on things like this in our food system and food justice, because that's all part of our local food landscape. So it's important to understand these backgrounds of the food desert, food justice, to understand this is all plays into the fabric of our landscape. So food distribution, we've got two different types of markets that we need to get our food out to. And there's going to be what's called a primary market and a secondary market. So our primary markets are things that like grocery stores, restaurants, convenience stores that are selling food too. Our secondary markets are going to be things like your farmers markets, your food hubs, what are called CSAs, your community supported agriculture food programs, food buyers clubs, micro grocery stores, and things like that throughout the state. So when it goes from your farm to your processing, and then these are the logistics that we need to get it out to distribute to these sorts of places to get out to our consumers. So our primary markets, these grocery stores, are going to be really hard for farmers to get your food into, especially these big box stores are really difficult. Because, for instance, if you're trying to sell to Albertsons, you've got to sell to all the Albertsons in the entire region. So the food's going to have to go to a central warehouse. And for Albertsons for this region, that's Phoenix. And then you've got to supply all the Albertsons in all of Arizona, New Mexico, and part of Colorado, which is probably more than your little farm can handle selling a lot of food to. And if you can't sell it to it all, then they don't want you. So that's really hard to do. So probably a much better bet is a little independent grocery store. If you've got some mom and pop independent grocery stores, they're probably a much better option for you to look at selling your food to. Now, the difference is Whole Foods has begun to look at local foods and feature local foods, and they will work with small farmers to supply one store and have a table at one store where they'll supply some food to try to get more local foods into their stores and out to their consumers. Sprouts is kind of copycatting that because it's been so popular, and so they've been jumping on that too. Now, the problem with this is that these are middlemen. So they're looking to add profit to whatever you're selling. They're basically reselling your product to a consumer. So your profit margins are going to be much narrower than if you sell a direct to a consumer, the end consumer. So for example, if you're selling a dozen eggs, maybe you're selling that $5 for a dozen. If you sell to a middleman, a grocery store or something like that, you've got to subtract whatever profit margins you think they're going to make And typically a grocery store, something like that, is going to want like a 30% profit margin. So that means your $5 dozen eggs, you're going to have to subtract $1.50 off of that because that's what the grocery store is going to want to make for that. That's about 30%. Some quick math here. So you're only going to be able to sell that to the grocery store for $3.50. So you lose $1.50 on that. Now, if you can sell enough of them and sell it regularly enough, then in volume, you might be able to make that. And for you to not have to sit out in the cold morning at a farmer's market stand every week and just drive up and drop a bunch of these off at the grocery store one time a week, maybe that's worth it for you and for the hassle. So you can weigh that out, send it to a grocery store, and then have them sell it for you as a middleman. But on the other hand, if you were to sell it direct to the consumer at that farmer's market, you would make the full $5 selling it direct to a consumer. So you need to weigh that out. So that would be another. And then restaurants are another one. Again, forget it with the big ones like Olive Garden, Applebee's. They're going to do the same thing as the Albertsons, and you have to do it to their central warehouse and distributor. So independent restaurants, your mom and pop restaurants are going to be a much better option because they'll buy just from you and sometimes they'll buy just what you have. You can work out deals like that. They're also going to be very cost conscious, so make sure your costs are competitive, but they're also looking for quality, things like that, unique things. So if you have something that somebody else doesn't have, an oyster mushroom or saffron or something like that, that they can advertise or that can make one of their restaurant dishes stand out as a competitive thing, then you can maybe command a higher price, lock them in, and you can get them as a consumer, a customer buying your product regularly. And then the secondary markets are going to be things like your farmer's market. And the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association, the link right here can help you find a farmer's market that's close to you. And again, the benefit of the farmer's market is that you can sell direct to consumer and capture that full $5 and not lose the $1.50 selling to a middleman and lose out a 30% on that. Other ones would be food hubs, co-ops, and CSAs. Now we have a ton of them all over New Mexico. These are middlemen, but the benefit of these is that they allow a higher profit margin than many grocery stores and restaurants because their consumers understand that buying in New Mexico, it's going to cost more, that a lot of the produce costs more to grow and costs more to ship out and to get there. So a lot of their consumers are willing to pay a little bit of a higher price to get these sorts of things, to pay farmers a fair wage. So you may be able to capture your full $5 and sell it for the full $5 to these sorts, and then they'll add their profit margin on top of that price. So you don't lose out. And here's a couple of them. Desert Spoon, La Semilla, the National Centers for Frontier Communities, La Montanita, New Mexico Harvest Delicious, La Agricultura, La Cosecha, Skarsgård, and there's many, many, many more all over New Mexico. Find the one that's closest to you and see if and a lot of times they will come right out to your farm and pick up things from your farm. So that's another option that we have uniquely here in New Mexico. And for folks who work with me, you're probably familiar with La Montanita because you can often drop your things off and then we'll get it with the National Center for Frontier Communities. Frontier Food Hub is the nickname for them. They will pick it up and drop things off directly at our facility for freeze drying and then get things back to you. So we work with them quite often. Some other programs that you can sell your food to throughout New Mexico is the Double Up Food Bucks program. You get registered with them. You find out about the program, learn about that, get registered and all of that, and then you can accept SNAP, EBT, what was formerly known as food stamps. Usually this is at farmers markets. You get qualified for that. And then people can use their food stamps and things like that. And what happens is when they spend, they get to, everything is half price, or they get to spend twice as much and get twice as much from you. So for your $5 eggs and things like that, then they get twice as much. They can get double these coins and things like that. So they can use $10 for those sorts of things and get twice as much. You still get the same amount, which is fantastic, but your customers end up spending twice as much. So it's a fantastic program. It's encouraging folks who are low income to buy more healthy fruits and vegetables, and eggs are part of it. And I believe dairy is part of it as well. So it's encouraging them to eat more healthy foods to help with those health disparities and things like that. WIC is another one. It's women, infants, and children. They qualify for this program, and it's a supplemental nutrition program. Once you register, you are educated in the program and you become an authorized WIC vendor. Then they're able to purchase foods through you. Often you work with a food bank or a food pantry that's a WIC program, and then they'll buy in bulk from you as a farm. And you can help out a needy population as well to help with supplemental nutrition. And then the New Mexico Grown Program is a statewide program where the state will subsidize underserved populations at schools, senior centers, daycare centers, tribal centers, where they provide them with grant money, and then they're allowed to spend that grant money to purchase with approved New Mexico grown vendors, farmers throughout the state. And so you register as a farmer or rancher to become an approved New Mexico supplier vendor in the program. And for those of you who are in the AIBE program, you'll be registering, and you'll be taking you through the program to become a registered supplier or vendor in the program. So you can sell your produce, your meat, all these sorts of things through this program. It's a wonderful program. Because it's basically a closed loop program. They're given money that they can only spend with approved vendors, and a lot of them are given pretty substantial amounts of money. And then they'll contact you, see what kind of wares you have, fruits and vegetables, and then we'll purchase from you. And it's a great program as a farmer to be part of. And they have to spend that money, that grant money, before June, usually by the end of May 31st. And if they don't, they lose it, and they'll get penalized the next year if they don't spend it all. So they are anxious to spend it all, and they definitely want those fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that in the program, and meat and so forth. So it's for our farm has been a wonderful, wonderful business. And freeze dry is allowed in it. That's considered a minimally processed. So you can, if you do value added like that, it's definitely allowed. Some other programs as well. The Farm to Food Bank program just got announced today that the State Farm to Food Bank program has now been funded by the state of New Mexico. It was shut down for a long time from the feds, and now the state, and I think the feds actually, I'm sorry, the state has funded it, but I think the feds have now reopened it up, and it's now going to be opened up again. So this way, the food banks can buy directly from you. And in the state of New Mexico, they only purchase for New Mexico grown vendors. So if you're approved through the other program, then they will purchase from those vendors because you've already been vetted and so forth in the program and are known to be a safe, reliable vendor. So they will purchase from you for the food bank. So definitely try to become a New Mexico grown vendor, because now the food bank will also purchase from you, and they have just gotten a pretty good lump sum of money as of today. This morning was announced over the radio. The Fresh RX program is another really great program. This is a program where fruits and vegetables, and I do think they actually have expanded it recently, but folks that have diet-related illnesses like obesity, heart disease, hypertension, and so forth, are given a prescription for fruit and vegetables to add to their diet. And so clinics, there's a list of clinics that are part of this program. Hospitals and other clinics will issue fruit and vegetable boxes out to clients. And so they will purchase all of these fruits and vegetables from farmers all over the state to make up these boxes, these specialized boxes, and they're geared specifically toward these particular illnesses. I think they've since actually expanded it to some other illnesses as well, including cancers and so forth. And then we'll issue these boxes and they go out weekly and the clients will get these fruit and vegetable boxes. And it's all based on this study that came out in 2003 by the American Heart Association. And they were showing that clients that were issued fruit and vegetable boxes were actually doing better, as well, if not better, than people who were given blood pressure medications and things like that. They were doing better than the pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical industry was really pissed off by this study and tried to challenge it and fought it and fought it. And the study has withheld and stood up against all of those and has shown, and subsequent studies have reaffirmed all of this, that fruit and vegetable, changing your diet can be just as powerful as going on medication. So it's received even more funding from both federal and state. And so these programs have expanded since. And so there's a ton. And now a lot of health insurance companies. So I know Presbyterian Health Insurance actually has their own program and works out of a hospital here in southern New Mexico. And I think there's several others across the state as well. So jump on this link, find out, and find out if you can be a supplier and sell to any of these. They're always looking for fruits and vegetables and things like that. And again, I think it has expanded to other things as well. I think there's fresh eggs for proteins and dairies and things like that that they include in these programs as well. And maybe honey might be another one that they would include for antioxidants and things like that. So check up, contact them, and I think they're buying all over the state to supply these programs. It's another really good opportunity. Pricing strategies. Penn State Extension has a really great pricing strategy for farmers. This is for farmers for helping you with your food business to identify your customer. How much can your customer pay? Are they repeat? What kind of products do you have? What should you charge for your products and things like that? And they have some really great guides to help you walk through some of those steps and figuring out the pricing methods and strategies for that. New Mexico has its own regional food system. So this is a graph that's based on an index comparison of pricing from across the state. And so this is comparison to the national average for food prices. So you can see prices for Albuquerque are a little bit below national average, but if you can see prices in Santa Fe are much higher than national average. And so if you look across the state, this is Mescalero, well below Shiprock, a little bit above Mescalero. So if you're someone who was growing, for instance, in Roswell, so that's close, higher than Mescalero. But if you're growing in Roswell and you took yours to Las Lunas, is it worth the drive? You'd make a little bit more than what if you sold it locally at a farmer's market. But if you took it to Santa Fe, you could make a lot more money for the same product, that same fruit or vegetable, that if you took there, you could make substantially more if you sold to that market. So selecting the types of markets that you want to take it to, if you took it from Las Cruces to Bosque Farms, you'd make a little bit more, but is it worth the gas? Is it worth the time? Is it really worth that effort for the extra 2 point difference that you might make percentage wise on the food? I would say no. For me, I would not drive all that time, waste all that gas, time, and energy for that little bit. I would hang out here in Las Cruces and sell my stuff there. Santa Ana Pueblo has a surprisingly high amount. So you can kind of take a look at some of these and see, is it worth it to sell out of your region? Now, on the other hand, if you had a food hub that could transport your food for you efficiently to that and sell through the New Mexico Grown program. Say if you're a Mescalero and you get the food hub to sell it to a school in Santa Fe and transport it for you and the cost was really efficient, then yeah, you could actually make a fair bit of money on that product than if you just sold it at a farmer's market right there in Mescalero. And they're already transporting it there. That might be a really worthwhile, if you could just get it from Mescalero down to Alamogordo, and then they pick it up there and then take it to Santa Fe. Like that might really be worth it for you. So these are the sorts of pricing that you have to really think about when you're marketing your products. So think about some of those things when you take a look at the slide. Think about and then weigh the distance and the prices and things like that, and contact some of these food hubs and ask them, how much is it to transport this to there? And get those prices and find out how much more you would make profit wise and if that's worth it for you. All right. I think we've made it just in time to get through. So the next steps, let me